Angelica saw the inspector, she turned around and headed down a dark, lonely alley. She continued walking until she felt the inspector's presence behind her. "Madame," he said. Angelica turned around and she feigned surprise when she saw the inspector. "Inspector Burke! How nice to see you! What are you doing here?" The inspector reached in his pocket and he held out Angelica's earring. "I came to return your earring," he said. Angelica took the earring and she pocketed it. "Thank you so much. Where did you find it?" "Well, it's interesting you should ask," he said. "We found the earring next to the body of Professor Fredrick Guthrie." "Oh my goodness!" Angelica clapped her hand to her face. "The professor's dead?" she asked. "I'm afraid so. Did you know him?" said the inspector. Yes, no, well, maybe, kind of. We met on the airship. We both escaped together right before the Phoenix crashed, and then we got separated in the smoke. I didn't realize he had died. What happened?" "Well, that's the interesting part of this whole investigation. When we found him, the arteries in his legs, neck, and arms had been severed. We actually believed the professor had been murdered." "But that doesn't make sense. Who would want to murder the professor?" "I'm not sure," said Inspector Burke. "We were hoping you might know?" "No, honestly, I have no idea. We just had met in the airship." "Well, I've encountered another unusual setback," said Inspector Burke. "What would that be?" said Angelica. She didn't like the look in his eyes. He seemed too determined. "I chatted with the Royal Navy, like you asked, and they gave me a passenger list." Angelica took a step back. She knew where the inspector was going with this line of questioning. "It seems, madame," said the inspector, he took a step forward toward her, "that there were 65 bodies that we found, and there were only 65 people on the passenger list. Your name was not there." Angelica had no idea what to say. She only knew she needed to get out of the situation as soon as possible. She figured honesty might be the best resort. "Inspector, that's correct. I was on the ship. I was not on the list." "Can you tell me why?" he asked. "Inspector, I'm not authorized to divulge any of that information." The inspector looked down. He put his hand in his pocket. "I was hoping for a more honest answer, Miss Blackmoor." He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to bring you in." Inspector, you are a gentleman and a good person. Please go home." The inspector stepped closer to her. His chest almost touched her bodice. "I'm afraid, Miss Blackmoor, I'm not authorized to do that." Angelica knew the situation would not end well. Secrecy was a vital part of her organization's survival. Arrest was not an option. She needed to change his mind, and quickly. "Inspector, please, you need to forget you saw me. Turn around and walk away. Don't do this." "Pleading will get you nowhere, Miss Blackmoor." "Inspector, I'm not pleading for my sake. I'm pleading for yours. Walk away. Now. Forget you ever saw me. Go home." The inspector reached for her wrist. "I'm sorry, Miss Blackmoor." The moment Inspector Burke touched Angelica's wrist, she sprung into action. She wrapped her arm around his neck, and she bounded up the alley's 3-story walls. The moment she reached the roof, she threw him to the ground, and she flicked out her wrist. Out shot the daggers. With 3 swift jabs, she took out his pulmonary, jugular, and brachial arteries. Angelica held the professor's head in her lap as he bled, muffling his screams with her hand. Her mind replayed the shrieks of terror that she heard from the passengers on the Phoenix. It replayed the pleas she heard from the professor, begging for mercy. It replayed the feeling she had when she knew she had held the constable for too long. She looked at the sky, the clouds, anything but Burke's eyes. Finally, he went limp. Angelica Blackmoor had destroyed a good man, all for the sake of secrecy. Angelica Blackmoor crouched on the roof, looking down at the mortals as they passed below. To them, she was nothing more than a creature who lived within the confines of fairy tales. A few humans, like Alistair and Harold, knew of Angelica and the organization's existence, but even they didn't know the organization's true plans. See, Angelica and others like her were interested in Fritz Haber because they knew he would become the father of chemical warfare. Professor Guthrie's notes and research on the mustard gas would help him navigate that path with greater ease. Then it would only be a matter of time. The humans' inability to live with peace with each other would be their undoing. Angelica knew she needed to go back to the organization and tell them of her mission's success, but she simply couldn't move. She kept replaying the screams of the terrified passengers on the Phoenix in her head. She kept feeling Inspector Burke's struggle for life. Neither would go away soon. For some inexplicable reason, Angelica Blackmoor started to sob. For the first time in her life, she wondered whether or not she was fighting on the right side. Angelica saw the inspector, I have an itch on my nose. The moment the inspector's all right, try again. The moment try again. The moment Angelica saw the professor, he's the inspector, we're trying again. Okay. The moment Angelica saw the professor, she turned around and headed straight. Professor! The moment Angelica saw the inspector, it's inspector, not professor, and I'm never going to get that right. Who'd want to murder the inspector, professor thing? Stop being rhyming names. Who'd want to murder the inspector? Professor, I'm really keep doing this. Angelica held the professor's head. She took the professor, she threw him to the ground. He's not the professor, he's the inspector. Professor's already dead because she killed him. Oh my gosh. Inspector Burke did something. Out jumped the daggers. Dang it. Dang it! Dang it! They shot, they don't jump, they're not alive. 3 swift jabs. She took out his pulmonary, jugular, and brachial arteries. That was close. Angelica held the inspector's head in her lap and covered his mouth. Dang it! The moment Angelica did something cool, all right, we'll try again. To them, she was nothing more than a creature that kept... I'm so happy you brought me this earring. This is the stupidest part ever. I'm never going to get this done. Next time I write something, it's not going to have this much dialogue.